esteemed Professor Progress Sibinda from the Department of Logistics. She's an associate professor in supply chain management from the Nelson Mandela University. We would be privileged as she will be sharing executive insight with us on how to collect primary data using questionnaires. Just some few housekeeping rules before she takes the stage. I kindly remind you to mute yourself when you join us, and please try and make sure that in the course of the presentation, you are muted. Once she's done with her presentation, we'll have the opportunity to engage with her to be able to get clarity or make contributions, comments based on our understanding on her presentation. I think on this note, I'll then offer the platform to our esteemed professor, who will be able to speak to us for over 30 to 40 minutes, and then we'll have a privilege. Indeed, it's a privilege to be able to listen to her, and I'm trusting that you will concur with me after this presentation. Over to you, Professor. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Prof. Good afternoon, viewers, and welcome. The previous session has taught you how to make use of secondary data, but as you know, secondary data has its own shortcomings. There are cases where secondary data fails to fit into the primary purpose of that current study being conducted. And when that happens, you as the researcher will have to go out there and collect primary data. When we look at primary data, it is the data that you as the researcher would collect from the primary sources, and you can make use of the interviews, you can make use of questionnaires, you can make use of observations and even experiments. Our purpose for this session is to look at how you can make use of questionnaires to collect primary data. Okay, I can't seem to go to the next slide. If you can help me with going on to the next slide.
Precious, can you assist? Just tap on your the arrow, the page down arrow on your laptop, and then the slide will move down.
From my side, no response.
Are you the one sharing the slides?
I think she must be the one sharing.
All right, Motegi, can you assist?
I'm currently using my phone, so that's where the problem is. Let me just resolve this.
Prof, can I suggest that you can use your note and continue, and then when she's there, she can just place it where it's supposed to be.
No problem. Thank you, Prof. So the whole purpose of this presentation is to try and give you a bit of a background of questionnaires. We'll then also try and look at questionnaire design, paying close attention to the question type that you can include there, and also zooming into the rating scale type of questions. We'll then move on to the modes through which you can distribute your questionnaire. And we also look at the factors that you can consider or take into consideration when you are deciding on which method to distribute your questionnaire. And in the end, we look at how can you improve the accuracy of your findings if you make use of questionnaires to collect data. When we look at questionnaires, generally questionnaires are just a structured tool that is used by researchers to collect primary information. It comprises of a series of written down questions or statements in some cases, which comes together with some close-ended, most of the times comes with a close-ended type of responses from where you as the respondents will have to make their choices depending on what best suits their attitudes, what best suits their previous behaviors, what best suits their values, and what best suits their experiences. If a questionnaire is properly administered, it can serve as an excellent tool that can help the researcher to gather quantitative data on the respondents' values, experiences, behaviors, and even of their attitudes. Questionnaires, although they can be used to collect open-ended or qualitative data, there had been some kind of debates around that issue to say, why then go for a questionnaire if you can just make use of a semi-structured type of an interview? So our focus today will be on quantitative data that you collect using the questionnaires. Questionnaires are used mostly when a researcher's problem is such that it demands that you follow an explanatory research design that requires you to quantitatively explain the nature of relationships that exist between different variables, or that requires you to describe the variables in question that you seek to find more information about in a quantitative manner. You can also find these questionnaires being used to collect quantitative information, which then informs decisions in terms of policy making. We also collect information. We also collect primary data using these questionnaires so that we can also help inform the decisions that the stakeholders that we are surveying can also make. We collect primary data also to share amongst ourselves and also with the stakeholders. Now, looking at the types of questions that you can include under questionnaire design, we have what we call the dichotomous type of questions. The dichotomous type of questions are questions in which the researcher provides the respondents with just two extremes of responses. That's where you find the yes or no type of questions. This is where you find the true or false type of questions. This is where you find the agree or disagree type of option. And there is no option for those who want to sit in between. There is no option for those who want to actually portray the neutral attitudes. There is no option for those who are so indifferent in terms of their behaviors or in terms of their values. So when we look at these dichotomous type of questions, they are useful because they can help you to, you as a researcher, to then try and make some kind of comparisons, because it's easy for you to compare and find some kind of patterns. You can also detect some kind of variations from those to see, okay, if respondent A has answered this as this, and if respondent B has also responded to this question as this, then you make your own kind of inferences based on that. So when we look at dichotomous type of questions, they're rather easy for most of you as the researchers to make use of. Cater for the neutral responses, neither do they cater for the moderate type of attitudes from the respondents. We also have what we call the trichotomous type of questions, for three, where you find now the two extremes. I'll make an example of the like or dislike. In the case of like or dislike, so you're assuming that worst case scenario, one can actually hold a strongly negative attitude towards something or towards an object, so they dislike that particular object. On the other extreme, one can actually totally like that particular object. And then you make room for those who are indifferent, those who are neutral towards the particular object. So that's what we mean by trichotomous. When we look at these two type of questions, like I said, they do not make room for moderation in terms of the attitudes. We also have what we call the multichotomous type of questions, under which you find your multiple choice type of questions, and you also find the rating scale type of questions. When we look now at the rating scale type of questions, this is where you find the Likert scales. And under the Likert scales, they start from 4-point Likert up until 101 so far. So that's what had been recorded. So if you have actually assessed your problem and also assessed your research objectives and as well as research questions, and you can see that, okay, from this, I gather that the nature of data that I need to gather is such that it does not require any kind of midpoint type of responses, then make use of the 4-point Likert scale. But should you then realize that this type of data that you need to gather requires you to also cater for the midpoint type of responses, along with the moderate attitudes that some responses tend to portray towards certain objects, then the 5-point Likert scale is the best scale for you to make use of. The 5-point Likert scale type of questions are rather recommended, or they tend to yield robust results if they are applied to people of low cognitive skills, people who barely cannot make a clear distinction between those fine-grained type of distinctions between the moderations if you decide to extend the points of moderation. So if you look at a 5-point Likert scale, you have to check on the attitude strength of your respondents. You also have to look at the level of understanding of your respondents. It is better, the 5-point Likert scale is best for the general public, where you find a mixed bag of respondents, some who can have a sound understanding, others who barely have an understanding. So the whole idea is such that you will not leave out anyone in the process. We also then look at the 7-point Likert scale, which has so far been deemed the most suitable and the most optimum type of a scale, if and only if your type of respondents have sound knowledge such that they can make those fine distinctions between the points that you have provided. Remember, what this means is you have those two extremes. That is, either one agrees with a particular object or someone disagrees. Is either one strongly disagrees or they strongly agree, and then you then give those moderations in between. Now that's where you find your slightly tend to agree and your moderately tend to agree. And for a respondent to be able to understand that and actually link that to their particular attitudes, there is need for high levels or high skills in terms of understanding so that they can make that distinction. They also ought to hold such strong attitudes for them to make such distinctions. All right, so when we look at that, you cannot make use of a 7-point Likert scale over a telephone. You cannot conduct it over, the telephone. You cannot administer it that way. Why? Because the main point is you have included 7 points. And for you to tell someone over the phone that point number 1 stands for agree, point number 2 stands for slightly agree or slightly tend to agree, until you get to the 7th point, it's mission impossible. So you'd rather stick to those ones which have got shorter or lower, a less number of the points when you are going to conduct this over the telephone, okay? So yeah, so when we look at the 7-point Likert scale, it yields high validity in the sense that, you know, when you cater for those who tend to finely distinguish between the type of attitudes and how moderate, to what extent is it moderate, people tend to actually provide more honest responses. However, do not overdo it. The more you increase on those points, it becomes now difficult for the respondents to then tell which one is which between what is actually provided.
My professor,
so which can okay.
the benefit of the participant. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you so much. So when we look at this point, the scales, the points in the scale that you are to include in that questionnaire, you have to pay particular attention to the type of, to the extent and the nature of skills that your targeted respondents hold. You have to also check on the strength of their attitude so that you won't end up compromising on the validity of your results in the end. So yeah, remember, the more the points that you add on to this particular scale, the more compromised your scale becomes. So the maximum that people can hold, and evidence has actually proved that, is the 7-point Likert scale. The moment you go to 11 scales, then you should know you are really trying and pushing your luck. The moment you try and go to 101 Likert scale, then you know that's really, really pushing your luck. And the chances of you getting reliable results and the chances of you also getting valid results from that are very slim. So you have to think about that. The other thing that I want to also stress while it's on this issue of the rating scale type of questions is that when you are actually labeling the points that you are giving, instead of writing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like as you can see on question 1 there, where the researcher sought to actually assess the level of importance of having a supplier selection criteria, and the researcher chose to make use of numbering there. Yes, it's acceptable in this case because it's only one item. But what happens when the list of the items that appear there, gets longer, such that it's now, it goes until B12 or maybe B20. It becomes now rather absurd, for a respondent and to actually understand which one is which, amongst these numbers. What does 1 stand for? What does 2 stand for? What does 4 stand for? And what does 5 stand for? So making use of words rather is actually encouraged so that you can improve on the accuracy of the findings that you collect or gather as a researcher. So yes. Next slide. I've given you an example of how you can label your points. There I've labeled mine: strongly disagree, disagree, neutral, agree, strongly agree, and not applicable, for those who would say this kind of a statement or this type of a question is not applicable in my case. So do not leave out anyone, because there's a very huge gap between strongly agree and not applicable. There's another huge gap between strongly disagree and not applicable. So you as the researcher need to actually pay careful consideration when it comes to how you deal with the scaling of your statements there. Next slide. All right, so looking at questionnaire design, we have spoken about the type of questions that you can include in your questionnaire. Now we want to look at how are you going to order this type of questions in your questionnaire such that you can actually improve on the response rate as well as the accuracy of your results. It is very crucial that you pay attention and make use of the funnel approach. Just as broad as the funnel is, you are to also start your questionnaire, provide those broad type of general questions at the beginning. I will make an example let's say a researcher seeks to maybe ascertain the nature of relationship between the use of smartphones and maybe student performance. It would be wiser for that particular researcher to first of all look at whether or not these students make use of smartphones in their learning or not. So those are some of the broad type of or general type of questions that you can include. And then as now, the respondents now tend to build the rapport together with you as the researcher. You can then now include those specific research, those specific items or statements that actually help you to answer your objective, and those type of statements that require the respondents to spend much of their time, thinking, and also that might most likely be of less interest to the respondent. So you put them in the middle, and then towards the end, you then put those simple, rather interesting or even sensitive type of information. This is where you typically find the researchers including the demographic type of questions. In some cases, researchers tend to ask for people's age, and who doesn't know that if you ask for age and you have not given it in the form of a range, people feel rather embarrassed. If you ask someone like a lady, they would then say, no, man, you want to know my age? No ways. So such kind of questions, you'd rather include them towards the end. Still looking at questionnaire design, you have to also ask yourself, as you shall be reviewing literature, remember part of the reason that you review literature is so that you can get to see what kind of methodological implications does the literature that you found to be so relevant to your study also hold. And part of the reason is that so that you can also see if there are any kind of scales at all that had been developed and tested by previous researchers, which can be useful for your study. And if you look at them and you find any studies, any such studies that have variables that actually have this kind of scales that you need, that had been tested, there are certain things that you need to look at. You first of all need to check for the factor loadings. You don't just go about taking any kind of items or statements. You check how much of the percentage did this particular statement or question load into this particular variable. If it loaded more than 50%, what it simply means is that it explained more than 50% of that particular variable. So it's safe for you to make use of that one. You can adopt that one, and then remember to adapt it to your own studies papers so that it doesn't become a misfit. Also, what you need to check for as a researcher is whether or not there are no copyright issues that would arise from you adopting certain items or items from other previous studies. If there are any copyright issues, first of all, you need to seek for copyright approval. The other thing that you need to also pay attention to when designing a questionnaire is the wording of your questionnaire. When we look at the wording here, we're saying try by all means to avoid making use of jargon. Try by all means to avoid making use of any slang. Try by all means to make use of any big words. Those ambiguous terms that would confuse the respondent, such that they end up not being truthful in their responses when they're trying to respond to the items or questions that you have asked. So it is very, very crucial that you keep it at layman language, okay? And also, when designing your questionnaire, you need to also check of this targeted population of yours, are there some kind of persons or person who would be actually excluded? Should I only stick to the main language? And if you find even one person, there is need for you to translate those items and even the questions into other languages. But what you really need to do there is you have to make sure that you do not lose the intended meaning of the items, of the statements, or of the questions, in the process of translating it. Next slide, please. Now, we have spoken about the questionnaire design, and after you have designed your questionnaire, you obviously now are thinking about how should I then distribute the questionnaire? How can I administer it? There are two ways of doing it. You can either personally administer the questionnaires, you can either drop off, that is if you have decided to physically distribute these questionnaires. In that case, researchers can physically go to the respondents and actually administer those questionnaires by themselves. Or if the sample size is too big that one person cannot manage, you might need to train other research assistants adequately such that they are at par with whatever that you require them to know. Should there be any kind of questions that arise from the respondents and they need clarity from those research assistants, they should be in a position to also explain in the same manner that you would have explained had you been there. There are advantages and disadvantages, of course, of physically distributing this questionnaire, and some of which would actually be the increased internal validity. Why are we pointing out the increased internal validity? In the sense that you as the researcher or your research assistant, in the case that the sample size is too big, would be there to clarify whatever areas where the respondents would struggle to understand any statements at all or any kind of questions that are provided. The response rate tends to be high because you are there. You can physically and you can literally motivate your respondents to complete this kind of questionnaires. However, in trying to explain and clarifying issues where the respondents are literally struggling, the researcher may end up now guiding and leading the respondents towards a particular response, which is what we're referring to as researcher bias. Try by all means to remain as neutral as you can in that particular case. The other way through which you as the researchers can distribute your surveys is through mails. You can literally have your questionnaires distributed through post. You can have them posted, but for you to do that, you need to make sure that you have a mailing list that has all the required information of your respondents. And to ensure anonymity at all costs, the cover letter or that introduction letter or whatever you call it, some would call it the letter of information. That letter should expressly specify to the respondents that they need not mention their names in the questionnaires. And they need not to return back these questionnaires with their names on it so that it remains anonymous. Okay, so the advantages again, when you choose to make use of the mail surveys to actually distribute your questionnaires, some of which would be the high anonymity. But this one highly depends on whether your questionnaire does not ask for any kind of information that would personally identify the respondents. And also try and have a broader sample so that you cannot literally link specific responses to particular respondents. Of course, the response rate is so low because remember, the respondents would have to answer this at their own time and in the comfort of whatever place that they think would be conducive for them. And that time may never come at all to some, and they end up actually, that kind of a questionnaire might end up in the trash bin. Yeah, and you are not there to clarify any form of difficulties that the respondents might find, in terms of the statements that you have included in your questionnaire. The other way of distributing your questionnaire would be then the online surveys. You can do that through emails, and you can do that through the Google Forms. You can make use of the Survey Monkeys. You can make use of the SOCO survey. Depending on your sample size requirements, if your sample size is so large enough, Google Forms would just allow you to get as far back as 100. And that if your sample size is larger than 100, then Google Forms would need to be complemented with other platforms such as your Survey Monkey, or you'd rather go make use of the SOCO survey, which has unlimited number in terms of the sample. You can make use of the email either to communicate or to send the link to the respondents to say, here's the link, just click on the link, and then they will then see the probes to just complete the questionnaire. Or others may choose to make use of the of the email to attach the questionnaire and ask the respondents to say, complete the questionnaire and then reattach it and send it back to me. Anonymity tends to be compromised in such instances. When we look at the disadvantages of making use of online surveys, is that one, that there would be strong sample and selection bias, in the sense that this type of a method requires the respondents to have certain equipment, such as your laptops, your computers, your smartphones, or whatever that they can use so that they can access the survey, the online survey. So in the event that I happen to be part of the targeted group, but I do not have maybe data for me to access that online survey, what happens to me? So that's where the bias now comes in. And the other thing is, it is so unrestricted, it's open for everyone. Almost anyone can actually complete or attempt on those questionnaires, and even the robots can even complete those surveys. So that makes now the validity and reliability of this of the responses to be so questionable because of that. However, to resolve that kind of a problem, you might, before you're still busy, whilst you're still busy with the setting up of your survey online, you might want to include a survey password so that one does not just, click on it, whereas they're not the rightful persons. Also, security and privacy issues tend to arise. Next slide. All right, so we have now spoken about the ways through which you can distribute your questionnaires, but what kind of factors could help you in your choice in terms of how, which mode and which method of distribution to make use of when you want to distribute your questionnaire. You might want to think about the length of your questionnaire. You might want to look at how simple or how complex your questionnaire is. You also have to consider your budget and also consider the time that you also have at in your hands to do that particular study. In the event that your questionnaire is so long and it is complex enough that respondents would require your presence or the presence of your research assistants that are well trained so that they can clarify certain difficult statements or questions. And also, if your budget allows you to do the traveling, then go for personal, physically distribution of these questionnaires. But if your budgets are so low, but the questionnaire is long and it is moderately complex, and you happen to have the mailing list that has all the required information to enable you to mail those questionnaires to the respondents, then you can make use of the mail survey. And in cases where you've got short questionnaires that have got short scales, as we just discussed before, and the questionnaire is easily understood by anyone, and you intend to reach out to a large number of respondents, then phone surveys would be the best. And if your questionnaires are short enough and you do have an emailing list, and one of your reasons for actually conducting the study is, and also choosing the research design and approach is not such that you want to generalize the findings to the broader population or to the entire population, such that representativeness would not be an issue, should you then go along with part or a fraction of those respondents, and your topic is interesting enough, and your targeted population have got high cognizant skills, and they've got strong attitude strength, then you can go for your online surveys. So what can you do then to improve the results of your questionnaire, the results of whatever that you have it collected using a questionnaire? The first thing is when you are formulating your questions or your statements, you have to be guided by the research problem and the research objectives. Go back and look at those. They'll give you a direction in terms of what type of data is required for you to actually collect and actually be in a position to fully address the research problem and achieve the research objective. And also for you to be able to identify the most suitable target respondents. You also have to structure your questions very well in simple language, as we spoke about this. Avoid double-barreled type of questions, like you'd find someone saying, how is dash 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 and why in the same statement. When you do that, your respondents may tend to be so confused that they don't know which one have I answered. And by the time they are done answering that particular question, they will not have time to go back to check, have I answered all the questions? So rather have the how question separately and the why question as another standalone item. Avoid asking leading question and ambiguous questions that are so unclear, and also adding, a bit of these red herring questions that will help you, that have nothing to do with the survey, just to help you to keep track of who has been paying attention as they were answering. This will also help you to check the accuracy or how honest the responses that you have been given by the respondents are. Also try and randomly select your respondents if you can. Only if you can. And also check that for the scale length of your questionnaire, as you are designing the questions, this have to be based on the level of understanding of your respondents, as well as the attitude strength. And make sure that you make use of words instead of numbers in terms of labeling the points in that particular scale. And pilot testing is very, very crucial. And this pilot testing will help you to find some areas that can be problematic with your scales and with your questions or statements. You also have to do that using the very same targeted population, so that it gives you an idea of how will they be in a position to understand this. The last thing that I would want to say to you guys is try and you have to make sure that you train your research assistants where you are going to need a helping hand. Make sure that they are adequately trained enough so that they can handle whatever type of questions they would meet. I would then take this opportunity to thank you and to thank Prof for this opportunity and open this for questions and comments.